Okay, it is 2 after, so we are going to go ahead and get started. Again, thank you all for joining us today for our presentation, The Story and Evolution of Penetration Testing. I am Jessie. I'm part of our InterVision marketing team, and I'm here with Darren Manners, who will be our speaker, and Jeff Tunn, who will be our moderator today. And I will let them go ahead and introduce themselves here shortly. First, I'm just going to cover a couple of housekeeping items. First and foremost, we would love for this session to be interactive. We have the Q&A box down in the right-hand corner of your screen. Please feel free to ask any questions, and we will make sure we address them at the end of the session. Additionally, we are recording this session, so please look for a copy of that recording in your inbox by tomorrow morning. And with that, I am going to kick it over to Jeff.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Jessica. I appreciate that. Welcome to those joining live or those watching the recording at a later time. I'm Jeff Tunn. I'm InterVision's Strategic IT Advisor and host of the internationally recognized podcast Status Go. We're really excited to bring you this webinar today featuring one of our newest partners in our continuing efforts to help you protect your IT assets. If you're listening today, you know that security and resilience go hand in hand. You also know it takes a comprehensive program to identify, protect, detect, and respond to the evolving threat landscape. Penetration testing, or pen testing for short, is one of those unsung heroes in the battle against the attacks. Sometimes it's treated as just a check the box exercise. Yet it can be one of the most valuable tools in your efforts to identify and protect your data. That's why, as a former CIO myself, I was interested to learn about the evolution of pen testing. So let me introduce you to our guest today, Darren Manners. Darren is the founder and the developer of much of the technology you are going to see today at RedSpy 365. He is also one of the few people across the globe certified by the SANS Institute as a blue and red cyber guardian. Darren got his start in the Royal Navy Intelligence Forces and has spent over 30 years in offensive security. But before we welcome see, live, that's what happens when you're live. On the podcast, I get to edit those flubs out. Before we welcome Darren to the webinar, we have a poll question we would like you to answer. When was the last time you conducted a pen test on your IT environment? It should be popping up for you shortly here.
Give me 1 second, Jeff. I am opening this poll right now. I had to retype it. So we will be live in just a couple of seconds. Thank you, everyone, for being patient.
So as that poll question is getting entered in, be thinking about how often you pen test. Do you treat it as a check the box? So here you go. Please take a few seconds here and respond to this poll question. A few more seconds. All right. And Jessica, what were the results on that?
It looks like we have 5 of our attendees who have conducted one in the last 30 days. We have 3 in the last 6 months, 4 over a year ago, and 2 never.
All right. Well, you're all going to be interested in hearing Darren as he talks about this evolution of penetration testing. So, Darren, without any further ado, take it away.
Well, thank you very much. Firstly, before I start, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Perfect. I just want to make sure. I always double check. So thank you for that introduction. I've been doing this for a long time, and I always tell people, it's evolved, it's changed. Back in the day, you could walk into most companies and you could be what they consider like, a domain administrator or compromise the entire network with probably between 15 and 20 minutes. But it really did evolve. But thank you for the introduction. I've been over in the US now 20 years, but as you can tell, my accent hasn't changed. I always tell people in the accent scheme of things, I am the downstairs in Downton Abbey as opposed to the upstairs. That kind of makes it simple. So what have I learned in basically the time that I've been? I mean, I'm coming up to 50 now, and I've been doing this for, pen testing for like 20 years. I've been offensive security pretty much all my life, defensive security. It's really all about the tooling. And what I mean about that is, I can remember back in the day when I first left the military, I was working as a webmaster back, in those days, companies did have webmasters. That's when I started getting back into the offensive side of things. But, if I was to use Dreamweaver, I was considered a heretic because Dreamweaver made it very simple. It was, drag and drop. Now we build websites in websites. Back in those days, though, you was expected to build a website in Notepad. What happened was that the tooling became better. Obviously the technology became better, but the tooling became better. So we know that, that three-letter agencies probably have tools that, you can point and click and compromise systems. So it does become part and parcel about the tooling, but it is also about the technology. It's about understanding the risk of that technology. So as penetration testing evolved, technology has evolved as well, and risk has changed. Risk isn't always attributed to the latest technology. Maybe it's legacy technology that you've got in the system. In fact, when you do a pen test, you look at it from an upside down pie chart. And what I mean by that is that you have like a patch pie chart that says I've patched 99% of my systems, and that looks good. It looks, it's all green and there's one little thin line of red. But it's that one little thin line of red that I live in. It's those legacy systems, those systems that you're going to retire, going to update, going to patch, going to remove. It's, credentials being, easy guessable passwords or credentials left lying around in files. And that's why back in the day, things were easy. It was very easy. And this is where it has to change. Penetration testing itself is evolving. And I would say about 10 years ago, I was working on a project and I finished a penetration test, and 2 weeks later they was compromised. And I was like, wow, I suck. What happened? And I was part of the investigation team, the breach investigation team. And I looked at what had happened, and what had happened literally 2 weeks after I'd finished my test, a Struts 2 exploit came out. So they were fine for 2 weeks and then they sucked. And I realized that we have to do better. So typically right now, penetration testing is a photograph. That's a problem. It is just literally a point in time snapshot of this is what you look like. My job about 10 years ago was to move it from a photograph to a movie. I realized we had to do that. But I also realized that technology was becoming more resilient. It wasn't so much that you could do a port scan and systems fall over because they had terrible error handling. Nowadays, you could do a port scan, you're quite happy that systems don't fall over. But back in those days, no one quite knew. That some systems that was never meant to receive a packet suddenly received a packet. What would they do? But I understood that things were changing, that things were becoming more resilient. But also, it's really about the effort. If you think about it, the results of a penetration test, they have a limited lifespan. And in intelligence, my job is to provide that actionable intelligence, but the life of the intelligence value diminishes over time. So you need to know things as soon as they happen, or as soon as that risk evolves or is noted. But also, what we understand is there's not so many ninjas around anymore. It's harder to get cybersecurity if you've been trying to get people in the marketplace. So it becomes really important about where you put those ninjas as well. You don't want them necessarily at the end of the production line where they can't affect anything, only the end part. You want them further up that production chain. And so for me, as a penetration tester, the job when we start moving from a continuous or when we go from a static to a continuous, it really was trying to understand where do you put the ninjas and how do you bring that technology to play. What I didn't want to do was, if you're testing or you're continuously testing, say, 20 companies, I didn't want to be a plate spinner. And what I mean by that is go from company to company to company. They all had to be running at the same time, but they also had to bring in, I guess, the analysts, the best of breed tools. They all had to be able to work together constantly. and actually start to look for those delta changes. So it is about the effort, it's about the technology, and it's definitely about the tooling involved. But it is about the collective. You know, I always talk about the phrase collective resilience because I think that's very important. That there is no silver bullet right now. The job is to be the onion, not the egg. So you have those layered defenses. But pen testing should be testing those as well. And back in the day, you know, when I was doing pen testing, it was a, and it still is to a certain extent, you know, a very strong community. You know, it's a very, you know, we still know certain pen testers. We still know names associated with tooling. You know, it was characters. It was these people that led the way, as it were. But it's still about the collective. It's about that collective resilience that we can pull together. That becomes more important when you understand the DNA. When I do a test, I have a specific DNA that I test. You know, I have particular tools, tactics, techniques, procedures that I use. Other pen testers, other attackers may use different things. We try to follow the same framework, but we do sometimes come at it from a different angle. And that's important to understand, because what I had to do was I had to understand that I need to be able to add new content into the system very quickly. Because when you move from, you know, as I said, a one-off to a continuous, one of the benefits is that you can now start to engage new tooling or new tactics, techniques, and procedures as they become available. So it does become collective. But I think also it's also about engagement. We need people to be engaged, you know, and I, you know, hands up, when you do a one-off test, you go in, you test, you leave. That's your engagement. You know, I always tell my clients, you know, they can reach out to me afterwards, and some do, some don't. But really, it's limited skin in the game on a one-off test. You know, when a continuous test, you're much more augmented to the client. You now have more skin in the game. And it becomes more important for you to grow and understand institutional knowledge with the client. I'll talk about that later, because as you move from that one-off to continuous, you are able to start engaging at a much higher level. You're actually starting to understand institutional level. You're actually starting to understand compliance and root cause aspects. So there's more skin in the game from a pen tester when you move from a photograph to a movie. The other part is, and I put that at the bottom here, is it, you know, the future of offensive security. We you know, we always talk about we can't mimic a nation state. We have to start mimicking a nation state, because really that's getting quite blurry now. It's very hard to distinguish a nation state activity, because they do pass off tactics, techniques, and procedures to maybe organizations that will work on their behalf. So, you know, the blurring of the line between criminal activity, nation state is very hard to decipher at times. So where does Red Spy fit into InterVision? Well, we're a partner. You know, we have our own employees, where a lot of us are all ex-military. I've got one or two that are still National Guard. They're actually in the cybersecurity division and actually working. We have our own independent standalone consultative offering, but we do complement everything that InterVision does. So we're a trusted partner of InterVision. But really, what is Red Spy? And I always talk about, you know, as we moved from that continuous process, we didn't want to lose that white glove service. You know, often, you know, it's very easy when you're a one-off tester. You go in, it's kind of, you know, white glove at for those weeks or week or a couple of days, or however long the engagement is. But as you move from a one-off, you know, photograph to that movie, you still want to maintain that white glove service, and we do that through teams. But really, Red Spy is a combination of best of breed tools, bots, and analysts. You can never take the human element out of it. You know, I talk about my tools and my bots doing repetitive tasks, and my analysts doing interpretive tasks. Once you get an onboarded baseline, it's looking at the deltas and the changes. The old adage used to be that you should retest if you change your infrastructure. But to be honest, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to change nothing to become a risk. The world around you is changing fast enough. You know, and I think a lot of people have always seen penetration testing as a cost center. And what I mean by that is a tick box. It's, you know, compliance tells me to do it, or insurance tells me to do it. And that was fine, I think, as a one-off. But I do believe that it's the cornerstone of every regulatory compliance and frameworks. But as it moves, and really the only prohibition of it was the fact that it was prohibited for its cost. You know, it was hard. You either hired your own red team, or you had no red team, and you just hired someone that would come in once a year. And that's very hard to do metrics on as well, when your metric is once a year. One question that always pops into mind is, how many developers do we have in RedSpy? And it's not so much how many developers we have in RedSpy, but take a step back and look at the best of breed tooling that we have. I always talk about trust being transitive. We have all the best of breed tools in there, and each set of tool that we have in there has its own company and set of development team that's working on it. So we are a combination of multiple developers working on different areas of the product at any one time. The idea is that when you move from the photograph to the movie, you're going to be in that process of testing, identifying, reporting. Well, that's one of the things I learned as well, was that in a one-off test, you get provided with a report and we leave. And really, there's no engagement. I actually had weekends off when I was doing, one-off testing, because you would test and you leave. That's it. When you move into continuous, it's 24/7, 365. Bang goes the weekends. But the idea there is that, you're trying to understand that delta. And in a one-off test, you've actually got something slightly unique. Now you have to see, as those things change, you have to be able to map the impact to the business processes, map the impact to, maybe try and find root cause compliance. You want to be able to map the impact to maybe threat intelligence. And you then want to be able to explain that to the client. And this is what I talk about: actionable intelligence diminishes over time. So we've got to be able to get that information to you as soon as we have it. And that's where we start to use things like metrics, like mean dwell time, time of discovery, time of notification, time of acknowledgement, time of response or remediation. So that's kind of like where we start talking about moving from photograph to movie and how you can move forward. The other thing I wanted to build, especially when I was building this, was I didn't want to build a platform. I understood early on that a platform is one thing. It's literally, it's just going to sit out there and it's going to be hard to update. You got to be able to flow content into it. I talk about the best of breed tools that are part of RedSpy, but the one thing I don't mention is that there's thousands and literally thousands of other tooling that you can add into it. And some of these tools are created by one-off analysts. I mean, some of them are quite well known, but the idea is that we still got to be able to add that new content. Remember when I talked about DNA and me being a combination of specific DNA? Well, if you're able to gather the DNA of multiple people and feed that in through an orchestrator, which basically makes it, digestible by RedSpy, as it were, you then become an ecosystem, not just a platform. Because now you can take new content and feed it into the system very quickly and make it available to all the clients that we have. And we do that via something called tool access portals. If you imagine, they sit like an app store inside of RedSpy. And we have multiple app stores. So each analyst has their own app store. We have global app stores. But the idea is we can add content into these app stores and make them available to the clients below us. Now, the benefit of that is as well that I can also create nested app stores. So my app store becomes a combination of everybody else's app stores as well. I always look at it as like, imagine if, Apple was only limited to adding apps by their own engineers. So only Apple engineers can add apps. That would be a problem. I think they would do good, but I don't think they would get as much diversified or exciting content as you could do if you enabled the crowd to do certain things, if you enabled creativity from around the world to be able to add apps or content into that system. So to me, content is king. Content is everything. And this is where I talk about the tooling and technology being super important. You've got to be able to add new content into whether it's a platform or an ecosystem. It always has to be updated, and it has to be updated very, very quickly. And we use an orchestrator for that. That's talking a little bit about behind the scenes, because that's talking about what it is for me. You understand that I think having the latest and greatest shiny thing to test is good. We have to be able to mimic nation state. We have to move at the speed of nation state. We have to be agile. So it's really important for us to be able to add that content in, and that's effective for us. But really, the end result is still going to be the same for you. You want to identify new risks and what the bad guys are doing to them. So we still do things like we have now a convenient dashboard. Typically, pen test is handed a PDF. You might ask for the CSV file and then go through, and go tick box off. Well, when you can start to add in, a dashboard, now you can start to analyze. Maybe you can start to run threat simulations yourself. Maybe you can investigate and exploit things, prioritize resources. So one of the things we did was we was able to take all that kind of content and feed it into the system. So now you're not just looking at a particular PDF or document, Because again, we've moved from that photograph to a movie. So now as things change, you want to be able to connect in and understand what's changing and how that impacts you, and maybe analyze it, maybe ask some questions about it. That's kind of like the process of moving from that photograph to a movie. You go from being a photographer to a movie director as an analyst, but now your engagement is much higher. And also it's much more important. The other thing I said was, we talk about institutional knowledge, and this is where I'll pick up on that institutional knowledge. Because I can digest things like a business impact analysis, and because we can digest, we use things like SIG, standard information gathering from shared assessments, which maps, multiple compliances like HIPAA, NIST, PCI. We're able to take an asset and turn around and say, this risk on this asset affects these business processes, but potentially this technical failure occurred because of this control object failure. The way I try and separate risk, especially in Red Spy, is I look at hygiene versus significant events. So some risks are like hygienic, it might be TLS 1.1, you might need to upgrade to 1.2, commensurate with the data being protected. But if you rise to the level of a significant event, that means that potentially there is, a bad actor be able to compromise the system. So now you've risen to the level of that becomes a significant event. It actually rises even further if we map it to threat intelligence and say, not only is it a significant event, how the bad guys are actively exploiting this as well. You may need to do something about it. So that's how you can prioritize. Because to think traditionally, like a medium vulnerability on a high critical system is going to be much more of use to you than a critical vulnerability on the coffee pot. But typical pen testing, I have no idea what that system is. I don't have that institutional knowledge. I was always reliant upon you. And sometimes, bigger organizations, they struggle to maintain that institutional knowledge. Who's the data owner, system owner, business owner of that system? Who am I meant to be notifying that risk is appearing on that system? So by collating it all, we actually start to make those products, things like, BIA and maybe compliance, which, are pretty dry documents. No one likes to do them. But we now start to make them dynamic and give them new life, because now we start to understand the risks of business. And when we talk to a CIO, as opposed to saying, hey, we got a risk on 4.4.2.1, which means nothing to him. So we now starting to talk the language. We also have those penetration PDF reports, but these are printed on demand. Now when someone says, hey, can I have your latest pen test report? You can go to the portal, print it off and say, hey, there you go. This is our latest pen test report. We're able to start, as we said, we start digesting so we could do institutional knowledge. So now we could start bringing in compliance. Why would I bring in compliance? Because, well, it's the root cause of it. A technical failure occurs usually because of a control object failure. So if we see a systemic issue, maybe patch management, we want to look at what are you doing for patch management? Why is this occurring? Why? Because if we don't fix that root cause, then guess what? It's likely just to keep repeating itself in a hamster wheel of death that's going to happen. So we want to make sure that we get involved in that. We also have things like what's happened in the last 30 days. Sometimes we just want to take a piece of paper into a meeting and say, look, what's happened in the last 30 days? The other thing that's not really drilled upon here is really, especially with the tooling that we use, we do phishing as well. I see a lot of platforms out there, but they're sort of external and web application static. But we do social engineering because, it's kind of like the main thing, to be honest. It's what bad guys are attacking you with. It's where a particular threat actor, can compromise you. And, we understand that, I always talk about there is security awareness and then there is actual, sort of phishing to compromise systems. In other words, delivery of malware, maybe taking a credential, stealing it and seeing if I can reuse it. There's a difference between what a pen tester does and what security awareness does. So if you've got, products that are helping you with security awareness, maybe reduce the click rate down to one person, it really doesn't matter if that one person clicks on it and you're the egg as opposed to the onion, because at that point, I can gain access to a desktop. Maybe you've got no XDR, EDR, maybe there's, problems with the credentials, maybe you're using the same local admin password everywhere, and then I can start laterally moving. So you're moving from the attribution point, in other words, the initial attack vector of someone clicking on something, and now being able to identify other risk factors as you start to move laterally. Maybe we find that, hey, that local admin password is used everywhere. Or maybe that user has some pretty excessive, privileges that we can access. Or, maybe there's a service account that we can reuse and attack things elsewhere. So you start to look for different attribution points. And it's all about, being the onion, not the egg, and defense in depth. So someone said to me, who uses Red Spy? And in fact, it was an interesting question. I usually said, anybody that has a regulatory compliance, anybody that probably wants insurance right now, they always ask for typical pen testing. But what we find is we tend to, sort of align heavier with regulated industries. So we have anything from banking, finance, education, local government, electrical companies, power companies. And I mean, we're pretty much across the board. And I think that's kind of like probably that follows traditional one-off testing. Anybody that wants to test the validity of their defenses in depth usually goes all the way across the board. I like this one because it talks about the benefits of Red Spy, and it's got it's got some pricing in there, and it's got core at 35,000, core plus at 54,000. Core to me is external web application and social engineering. Core plus also does the internal side of things as well, and that's annual. Someone asked me if it was weekly or monthly. I was like, no, it's annual. Enterprise, really, when you start to come into enterprises, if you've got multiple geographical locations that require multiple portals and maybe your own separate ecosystem, very few require those. But the idea is that, you're going to move. And I always like it because people ask the question of, hey, Darren, X has come out today. Are we vulnerable to X? We've had those, and it's our worry, not yours, when things like the Equation Group, when they release all their dump, and we sit there going, oh Lordy, look, there's exploits for RDP, there's exploits for all these kind of things. And I always talk about people threat surface reduction, just to protect against the unknown as well as the known. But that becomes our problem. And like I said, it's that ownership, and that's one of the things I love about what we do is that we own the problem. Now, I've in this day and age, it's very rare to get people to own a problem. But, the idea is now we've got more skin in the game. We're there with you. We're augmenting you. We're working alongside you. We're actually able to provide metrics as well. So you can see over time as you're getting better, or maybe you see how your remediation is affecting things. Maybe you see your mean dwell time. We have things like return on security investment metrics as well. So we can start to put, almost like a percentage impact to fixing things. But the idea is that, we're moving, again, photograph to movie. But if you can see, it's really, we're trying to keep that pricing point pretty similar. So what am I learning right now? Well, obviously, I'm keeping my skill sets update as part and parcel. I always like the adage was if you're going to chop down a tree, you'll spend half your time sharpening your axe. That really is us. That's why we run teams on companies. I think it's about controlling the ecosystem entry. And I've got here currency. Currency is an interesting thing because, to be honest, it's still about the ecosystem. It's still about control of that ecosystem, how we can import new content. And content to me is new tools, tactics, techniques, and procedures. But maybe in the ecosystem, we'll start to offer services, modules that enhance the capabilities of Red Spy. So if you wanted to integrate it into Carbon Black, and you could have a simple dashboard, and one of the things we do as well is everything we do, we can send off to a SIM. So from command line measure, I always tell, we can send everything we do to the blue team. So the red team gets to see what the blue team does. And that's good because we do X, you see X, fantastic. We do Y and you don't see Y, there's a bit of a question because now we've got a gap that you're missing. And that's why I always have that question with SIM, companies, how do you know you're not missing things? And they're like, well, we set up, we test. And it's like, yeah, how do you know continuously? So it's very hard, but we do provide that feedback for that as well. I always talk about create unique things and be flexible. Flexibility comes along with unique things. It's very hard to explain. And I think it was I can't remember who the name was, but someone explained to me, if it was easy to explain, then it wouldn't be unique. And that's one of the things about Red Spy. If it's easy to explain, it wouldn't be unique. I've tried, multiple times to explain it. And I'll talk about at the end where you can go to look at it if you find my explanation a bit more complex. But really, it is about creating those unique things. And that's really part and parcel of what we try to do. I do surround myself with subject matter experts. I am definitely not the smartest person in the room at the time, any one time. I've got guys and girls that I think to myself that are absolute geniuses at what they do. And they have a very narrow field, but they are extremely brilliant at what they do. And that's one of the things that, we engage with is that we try to surround ourselves with subject matter experts on particular areas. I think it's got to be fun. I think you get better engagement. I think this is where we start talking about daily active users and monthly active user measurements. No one wants to we don't sit there and say, look, we want you to be on your portal 24/7, 365. We understand you've got other things to do, but we do want to be able to engage with you better. We want to, it's different from a one-off pen test. We augment your teams. We're part of your team. And so, we like the engagement level, even if it's just bi-monthly calls or monthly calls, we like the fact of being able to converse and talk about things. And this is where it comes back to that listen and create a feedback loop. We're very good at turning around if someone says, hey, could you do this? Or could Red Spy do X? And we look at it and go, yeah, that'd be cool, wouldn't it? And then we can go back to development and quickly add that in. Usually, we can turn things like that around pretty quickly. So it's definitely, we're learning, we're evolving. We've got an interesting roadmap. I think we're going to be a fantastic story as we move forward. And especially with our roadmap, we're building Red Spy Scout, which is going to be our sort of countenance to Cobalt Strike or any of the other rats out there, Metasploit, Meterpreter, or PowerShell Empire, anything like that. The problem is, this is where we talk about mimicking nation state. If I always use off-the-shelf tooling, the good guys know what I'm going to be coming at them with. In other words, the XDR, EDR, antivirus are going to know what I'm going to be coming at you with. Now, you can do some aftermarket stuff to make it disappear to a certain extent, but it's still going to come at you. So I've got to come at you with uniqueness. And that's when it goes back to that technology and uniqueness. I've got to come at you with stuff that people don't know. And so we've got specific teams that we're building for that to actually create that uniqueness for us. The other part here is talking about marketplace and challenges. That's going to blow people out of the water, I think, when that starts coming online. Because the marketplace is where we can actually create those centralized app stores, not just the decentralized app stores for our analysts, but actually create a crowdsourced marketplace where the DNA can be extracted for security researchers, added into the marketplace through the orchestrator so that Red Spy clients can digest it. It'd be akin to me, I always talk about Kali. Kali's a brilliant box, but it's kind of like me giving you a box of tools and some sheet metal and saying, go build me a car. If you don't know how to use it, it's kind of problematic. So I'm always of that Dreamweaver mindset, event action trigger, zero code, low code. The idea is I want to be able to people to build scenarios and put those scenarios into the marketplace. And then if you don't see anything in there, I want you to be able to create a challenge that if you don't see something in the marketplace that you want, maybe you want a PowerShell script to do X, challenge the marketplace to create it. And the next thing is we understand that this is complex. We got feedback saying, man, it's a fantastic tool, but this is complex stuff. It's like, yeah, we know we're a service, so we'll always help you out, provide and train you for it. If you want to, you can be completely hands off. I mean, you don't have to touch a thing. You can be totally hands off and just let us do it. But for those that want to get involved and understand it more, we have the Red Spy Academy. They can digest it a lot more. And basically it walks you through understanding, depending upon what hat you wear in your organization, it takes you on a pathway through the academy. So that being said, we have two things there. We have the Red Spy Academy, where you can go to today. If you listen to me, that's one thing. But you can go to the Academy, self-registration, and just listen to what's going on there. There's some fundamentals, overview, C-levels. Or you can go to the actual website, www.redspy365.com. And if you notice, we have a particular theme that runs across us. But hopefully, I think you'll get to the point where you'll understand that we're probably the best product you've never heard of. And I say that with, a tongue in cheek, but I always actually truly believe we're still probably the best product that you've never heard of. Hopefully you've learned a little bit about Red Spy. If you do want to learn anything more, please reach out to me. My name is Darren Manners, dmanners@redspy365.com. More than happy to discuss anything we do. If you just want to talk about security, I'm more than happy to talk about security. But I want to open it up to any questions, because I know I think it's always more interesting to provide feedback.
Yeah, so Darren, we have had a couple of questions come in, and when you talk about the ecosystem, what's the governance process for new content or new functionality coming into the ecosystem? How do you manage that and control that?
So that is like the key part of everything. So you control the ecosystem, you got to be able to talk about content. So we have like validated content. So right now, analysts are the ones that add content into the ecosystem. So we're the guys that do the tooling, take the tooling, add it into the ecosystem. Because there's always that question of, well, what if a bad guy could add something into the ecosystem? And we've discussed that ourselves. And you could go to, there's multiple ways you could do it. You control the currency. If you control the reward-based system, then you kind of dissuade people from the ecosystem. You can validate the content creators. And much like sort of Twitter, you can give them like a blue check mark for validated content creators. And these are guys that may have passed, or security researchers that may have passed a a background check, or we know, they've been a validated security researcher for us, and they can add content with, inside the system. So that way you can pick, if you was running a system yourself, you could pick validated, unvalidated, maybe students. We've talked about being able to add student content into the system as well, and even subscribe to people's particular content. But I think that there's two ways that you look at content. Obviously there's like a tooling that you can add to the system, and if it's an unvalidated tool, that's a risk until it's validated. Now the content creators themselves, they may want to become validated. So there's a two process. The client may only pick validated potential users, or validated scenarios, validated tooling in the system, but the content creators themselves may want to become validated, and they will have to go through a process to become validated. But they can not just validate themselves, but also the content. And there's multiple ways you can do that. But yeah, I think it's a good question, because we've always thought about, what if someone was to put a poison pill into the system? Well, it's like any tooling you have, any update that you have to be able to validate that tooling that goes in. And we've talked about even packaging the content up once it's created as an NFT, so that no changes can occur to that we control any change in that system. And so that way it's it's only packaged up for you. There's a change control with that system. In fact, you can run your own GitHub server, which we do, and put that content on there, so people can't validate something, then update it and get it, sneak past the validation, but it won't change because it's only going to get it from our GitHub server. So there's ways that we control the ecosystem. But I think the biggest way you control the ecosystem is by making the reward-based system a much more of a control. In other words, you control the currency. You basically control the reasoning for them being there. Hopefully that answers some of the question.
Well, another question. You use the metaphor of the photograph versus the movie, which I think is a great metaphor. But taking that a step further, a photograph on my network consumes a certain amount of bandwidth. A movie consumes a lot more. What's the impact of this continuous pen testing on my internal network?
Well, on the internal network, we've done this now for 10 years. And if you was to ask me back 10 years ago, would I have a major concern? Yes. Now, no, because it's designed for this. It's designed for bandwidth. The internal networks, we've never had an issue with, because people run scans all the time. People run tests all the time. It's basically just throwing traffic back and forth. The way we do onboarding is always important. So as we board, especially internal, as we onboard a company, we'll start off with different segments. So we'll understand the infrastructure. We'll understand maybe where there's any pain points in the infrastructure. Sometimes we identify, hey, guess what? Your routing isn't optimized. Do you want us to give you some tips on this? Because I've got guys that are CCI RNS guys. They'll just turn around and say, well, you need to add a few routes here, or you need to change your quality of service here. But we don't have that issue. And of course, on the external side of things, well, guess what? We're not the only people testing you. There's literally hundreds of people testing you every day, and we're the only ones probably writing a report for you. And that's the difference there. So back in the day, it was a problem, I would say. Nowadays, no. It's kind of like, I noticed and it goes back to that technology thing. If you go back to like when we used to build websites, people would be like, oh, why Google done really well? Well, it was a very simple website, didn't load a load of ads. So if you was on a low bandwidth, it was like, that worked. But, everybody kind of knew that the bandwidth was going to increase. So that wasn't necessarily the biggest problem. It wasn't so much the bandwidth that for me, I think that was never the issue. It was more a case of the technology and how it did error control. When you've got some things on a network that should never be connected to a network, when they receive a packet, they don't know what to do with it, and they die. That was a problem. So error handling back in the day was really poor. error handling nowadays is much better. It receives a packet it doesn't know about, just discards it. So back in the day, it was more of an issue, not so much nowadays. And we basically iron all that out in any onboarding process that we come through.
Well, and one of your earlier slides mentioned that you integrate well, you partner with InterVision, and as a partner, when you think about the ransomware protection as a service that InterVision has, where does something like Red Spy fit in? Is it feeding data here and there, or how does it integrate with everything else that's going on in that?
So when you have like a smoke alarm, the first thing you do is you go and press the button to see if the smoke alarm works. And maybe once a month, you might walk over and press the button to see if it's still working. That's pretty much what we're doing. We're validating the security that's in place. The definition of pen testing is always, to test the impact of exploits on an organization, or to show the vulnerabilities and show the impact to an organization, but also to test the defenses therein. And part of that is to test the defenses therein. So we can actually feed everything we do. So if you've got the SOCUS managed service, we can actually feed everything we do. And, as we do X and they see X, great. If we do Y and they don't see Y, then we can have that feedback loop of what did you do that made you disappear from our radar? And I've done loads of those where, we've done a test and, the SIM systems have lit up like Christmas trees. They're like, oh, we can see you. And then like I'll do, I'll make it down to a threat emulation. I'll say, okay, run this executable on a desktop. And they're like, yep, we see command and control. Or I'll be like, and I say, okay, now run this. And it's disappeared. And they're like, oh, what happened? What did you do? And it's like we went from HTTP to HTTPS. We just encrypted our stuff, or maybe we encoded it, and all of a sudden we just disappeared from your radar. Now that's where the question comes in: how do we disappear from your radar? My job is to go into a network, shine a light in those dark corners, and say, what are you missing? Is there anything missing? Do we have that notification process in place? If we done X, are you going to receive those notifications? So it's kind of like I said, the smoke alarm button. You go off, you press the button. And okay, Darren, we actually provide executables, so you could download an executable, walk over to a desktop and say, okay, I've got SOCUS as a service in place. Let me just run that. Okay, it detected it, it blocked it. Now let me see my events and notifications. Okay, found it. And then you can come back to us and say, okay, have you got anything that could bypass whatever flavor of XDR they have? We might say, yeah, we have. Look, we've got a particular technique here. Use that. So that's kind of like how we deal with all that.
Excellent. Well, Darren, we are out of time for today. I want to thank you for joining us today on this webinar, and thank you for bringing such a great product like Red Spy 365 to the market. I agree with you when you say it's probably the best product that you've never heard of. I think it's fantastic as a CIO myself. I think it's going to change the way we think about pen testing going forward. So thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
To those of you watching either live or on a recording, if you have other questions, be sure to reach out to InterVision. You can find us at intervision.com. Reach out to your sales reps. We'd be happy to talk with you about ransomware protection as a service, the other services we have, as well as Red Spy 365. Thank you very much.
Thank you.